Everyone has at least once tripped on a curb in their life. It's something that just happens. And a lot of things that people don't know are that the businesses that are outside of the curb or like the curb is in front of are usually the ones that are held liable for the accidents that occur. Some examples of this are the Wendy's accident or an accident that happened at the Rockefeller Center where the lady tripped and she fractured her arm and got monetary compensation of $100,000. The funny thing about the Rockefeller Center was even after this happened, they haven't changed the design of their curb in front of their building yet. But not only do healthy people struggle with curb negotiation on their accidents, people with disabilities have a hard time negotiating curbs as well.
Curb negotiation depends on two things: balance control and propulsion. Curb negotiation is usually an area of topic that's not considered very important or skipped over, but our mentors have been getting patients inside their lab that have been complaining about how stepping onto curbs has been an issue. So we have decided to look into that area of topic, and some other benefits besides helping amputees in in researching this topic would be the change in design of the curb, and inside of the lab it would be helping with physical therapy and rehabilitation and make it a smoother process, which will help.
The purpose of our experiment was to understand the variations in ground reaction forces from step to step while stepping up and down from a curb of typical height. And it was hard to do this at first because of the limited studies that have been done on curb negotiations. So this was just like an area for us to get a look and see, like get a feel for how the body acts with curb negotiations.
So because of the time constraint we had this summer, we had to focus on only one part of our project, which was a pilot group. And the pilot group consisted of 5 adults. The 5 adults were all healthy, and they were each asked to perform 3 trials, 3 times going up the curb and 3 times going down the curb. And the walkway consisted of 3 consecutive force plates, and you'll see a picture of it later on. And each force plate could collect data at 2,000 hertz, and also data were analyzed statistically using one-factor ANOVAs to determine differences between variables from step to step. And yeah. That oh yeah, that's that is a picture of me going up the curb, and as you can see right there, that is the first force plate. And a force plate is basically like a bathroom scale, but it measures force in newtons, and not only does it measure force vertically, but it measures force horizontally as well. And as you can see, that is force plate 1, force plate 2, and that is the third force plate, the gray plate right there. Right.
For this walkway, since we are doing the study of stepping up and stepping down, going in this direction was for stepping up. For stepping down, we just had them go to the other side of the walkway, which would continue on, and just turn around and go in the opposite direction. So for stepping down, the order of the force plates would be force plate 1, force plate 2, force plate 3. This graph is a representation of vertical force, ground reaction forces that were recorded. And if you look at the axes, these were normalized to have a force percent body weight, and then the x-axis was normalized for a percent gait cycle. You can think of the vertical graph kind of by dividing it in half, where this side of the graph is basically whenever you're stepping for vertical force, it's whenever your heel is hitting the ground, and as the dip occurs is whenever your foot gets flat, and then the other half of the graph is whenever you're pushing off the ground and creating a greater force. If you notice, for a normal walking gait, generally the 2 peaks, these are peaks, would be fairly similar. So for the blue line graph, That's pretty normal for a standard walking gait. And to help you explain which steps to which, the red line is for step 1, the green line is step 2, and the blue line was step 3. So the red line was the curb, the green line was the step off the curb, and the blue line was the next step after that. As you can see, the green line is a lot greater than the other two, which indicates the fact that there was a greater vertical force on that area. And then for here, the red line is significantly lower than the blue line, so there was a decrease in the force. This is the graph for the anterior posterior ground reaction forces, which is basically the horizontal forces. It's moving your body forward or backwards. And the axes were also normalized the same way as the previous graph. And it can also be divided in half, where the negative values are your braking forces that were applied. So it's the momentum where you're stopping. And then the propulsive forces are whenever you're pushing off your toes again to continue walking. And then the only noticeable thing we picked up in this graph was that the step for your first step was significantly lower than it was for the propulsive forces on the other two graphs. This is a bar graph of our stance time that we collected. And stance time is basically the amount of time you're applying force to each plate. So for the first force plate, second force plate, third force plate, those are backwards since we had to graph them in a uniform way. So for stepping down, this is actually the first step they took, this is the second step they took, and that was the third step they took. And you can see that stance time is significantly lower on the second step, which is probably because when you step down from something, you're catching your weight. So you're stepping normally, you step down, and you just kind of hurry past that one step. These are bar graphs that show the impulse. Impulse, if you look up here, is basically the amount of force that you can see applied underneath the curve of the graph. And the impulses for each step, like I said, this is your first step, second step, third step. The impulse force for the vertical graph was significantly lower, which is why on those lines that we saw, for the graph up here, the red line was lower than the green. These are the stepping down impulses for your anterior posterior, or you could say your moving forward force. And you can notice that the braking force, which is your stopping force, is a lot lower on your second step. So that was the step down from the plate. You have an increased amount of braking force, which makes sense because you're trying to catch your body weight in order to make a transition to a lower level. And then on your propulsive force, the first step, which is the red graph, which was on top of the curb, is a lot lower because if you think about it, when you're stepping down from something, you don't have to propel yourself up. You can let gravity just do the work for you. And then on the net force, again, the first plate is significantly lower.
And for stepping up, this is the vertical force measured. And as you can see, the second force plate had the highest vertical force when stepping onto it, and it also had the highest vertical force at this point as well. And the force plate with the lowest vertical force was the step, which is probably because when you step onto the second force plate, you are standing on one foot for a little while because you are preparing to push yourself up onto the third force plate. So there's more force pushed onto the second force plate, and those are the major differences in this. And also the third force plate has the least force because once you step onto it, you are not projecting as much force and you're quickly moving, trying to pick up your speed again because you're trying to move up to your original speed. And this is the graph of our anterior posterior force measurement. And this is the braking force that we measured and the propulsive force right there. The force plate that had the greatest braking force was the second force plate, which is because when you are walking, you have a lot of momentum going horizontally, but you do not have any force going vertically. So when you are about to step up onto a curb, you have to slow down your horizontal momentum. That way you can put more force into move up vertically and pull yourself up. And then there's a greater propulsive force in the third force plate because because you have to slow down your horizontal speed to step on the next curve. You're trying to regain that speed that you lost by increasing your propulsive force. And this is a stance time. For our stance time, the third force plate had the longest stance time because once you step onto the third force plate, you are attempting to regain your balance and your level, and you are going to continue walking. So, and the first and second force plate seem to be the same because they are on the same level, and you do not need to stay. The first force plate is about as long you would stand somewhere when you are walking regularly, and the second force plate may be a little or not higher at all. If it is a little higher, it is probably because you are preparing to step onto the next force plate. And as I spoke about that graph with my braking and propulsive force, over here you can see that for the second force plate, the braking force is the largest, and here the third force plate had the greatest propulsive force.
So for step down, as I explained to you in our results that we gathered, basically you can say that as the body weight transitioned down, it allowed the gravity to do the work. So like I said, so for step down, you have your curb step, and then you have your two lower steps. When you're walking up a curb, your body kind of slows down, and then you just let yourself step. And then the step comparative to that, the second step, is going to have a lot more force exerted on it because it has to counter the extra vertical force being applied because of gravity, since you're stepping down. The third force plate is the normalized graph. Like I said, the two peaks are very similar because after you've made that step, your body is going back to its normal walking pattern, and so you're resuming your normal transition.
And for stepping up, a trend that we noticed when we were going over stepping up is that when people were going onto the first force plate, they were walking regularly. Like the force was the same as if you're walking regularly because you are neither adjusting yourself to stepping down from level or preparing to step up onto a level. The second force plate, however, has the greatest braking force because you are slowing down your vertical, your horizontal momentum. That way you could have some vertical force and step over the curve. And your third force plate had the longest stance time because you are attempting. The third force plate had the longest stance time because you are attempting to regain your balance. And it also has the longest propulsive force because you just increased your vertical force. Because you are attempting to speed up and regain the speed that you lost climbing up the step.
So basically the conclusion, how do the steps vary between the plates? And as we've explained earlier, basically for stepping down, your vertical will decrease as you transition to the lower level, but then it'll increase as you're recatching your weight.
And with stepping up, your braking increases when you're about to step onto a curve, and your propulsive walking speeds up as soon as you step onto the curve because you need to slow down to step on, and you need to speed up to regain your original speed when you step onto the curve.
But as for both stepping up and stepping down, the ground reaction forces applied will always transition back to normal level walking.
So for our acknowledgments, we would like to thank our sponsors for allowing us to be here, and we would also like to thank our mentors, Dr. Jeremy Smith and Abby Ferris. They're sitting right there in the back. And Scott Abella, our advisor, right over there, and the rest of the FSI staff for helping us make this a great experience. Thank you all.